British India, a vast and diverse subcontinent, was long considered the jewel in the British Empire's crown. Its rich history, cultural diversity, and economic potential made it a prized possession for the British. From the majestic peaks of the Himalayas to the serene shores of the Indian Ocean, British India encompassed a multitude of languages, religions, and cultures. This diversity was both a source of strength and a challenge for the British rulers. The British Raj, as it was known, rested upon a complex administrative structure. This structure was meticulously designed to maintain control over such a vast and varied territory. This structure relied on a combination of direct rule in some areas and indirect rule through alliances with local princes in others. These alliances were crucial in maintaining British dominance and ensuring local cooperation. Beneath the veneer of imperial control, however, lay deep-seated tensions that would ultimately lead to the subcontinent's tumultuous partition. The growing discontent among the Indian populace was a ticking time bomb. The British presence in India dated back to the East India Company's arrival in the 17th century. This company, initially a trading entity, played a pivotal role in establishing British influence in the region. Initially focused on trade, the company gradually expanded its influence. Through strategic alliances and military conquests, it laid the groundwork for British rule. By the mid-19th century, it had evolved into a de facto ruling power. The company's control over Indian territories was so extensive that it effectively governed large parts of the subcontinent. Following the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857, a bloody uprising against British rule, the British Crown formally assumed control of India. This marked a significant shift in the governance of the region. This marked the beginning of the British Raj proper. The Crown's direct involvement brought about changes in administration and policy. The Raj's administration, while efficient in many ways, was also deeply flawed. It was characterized by a rigid bureaucracy that often failed to address the needs of the Indian people. It perpetuated a system of economic exploitation that benefited Britain at India's expense. The wealth generated from Indian resources fueled the British economy, while India remained impoverished. Raw materials flowed from India to British factories, while manufactured goods flooded the Indian market. This created a dependency that stifled local industries and economic growth. This unequal economic relationship stifled Indian industries and left the country impoverished. The lack of industrial development hindered India's progress and contributed to widespread poverty. Furthermore, the British administration often displayed a cultural insensitivity that alienated many Indians. Their disregard for local customs and traditions fostered resentment and resistance. Despite its drawbacks, the Raj also brought about significant changes to India. These changes, though often self-serving, had lasting impacts on the subcontinent. It introduced a modern education system which played a crucial role in shaping the future leaders of India. Developed infrastructure such as railways and telegraphs, and codified laws. These developments facilitated communication and transportation, laying the foundation for a modern state. These changes, while often implemented with an eye toward consolidating British control, also contributed to the growth of Indian nationalism. The very tools of British control became instruments of resistance. As Indians became more educated and aware of their own identity, they began to question the legitimacy of British rule. This growing awareness sowed the seeds of the independence movement that would eventually lead to the end of British rule in India. The relationship between Hindus and Muslims in India has a long and complex history, stretching back centuries. This history is marked by periods of both peaceful coexistence and intense conflict, influenced by various social, political, and economic factors. While periods of harmony and coexistence existed, tensions between the two communities were never far from the surface. These tensions often erupted into violent conflicts, leaving deep scars on the collective memory of both communities. Under British rule, these tensions were often exacerbated by the Raj's policies, both intentionally and unintentionally. The British colonial administration implemented strategies that sometimes deepened the divide between Hindus and Muslims, making it harder for the two communities to find common ground.
The British, often following a policy of divide and rule, sometimes exploited religious differences to maintain their control. By playing one community against the other, they ensured that neither could unite against the colonial power. One of the key factors contributing to Hindu-Muslim tensions was the question of separate electorates. This policy was a significant departure from the idea of a unified Indian identity and instead emphasized religious divisions. In 1909, the British government introduced a system of elections in India, but with a crucial caveat. This system was designed to create a semblance of democratic representation while maintaining British control. Instead of a common electorate where all citizens voted together, separate electorates were created for Hindus and Muslims. This division was intended to protect minority interests, but had far-reaching consequences. This meant that Muslims could only vote for Muslim candidates and Hindus could only vote for Hindu candidates. Such a system entrenched religious identities in the political process, making it difficult for a unified national movement to emerge.
While intended to ensure representation for Muslims, this system had the unintended consequence of solidifying religious identities in the political sphere. It created a political environment where religious identity became a primary factor in political allegiance. Furthermore, the British often portrayed themselves as neutral arbiters between India's religious communities. This portrayal was part of their strategy to maintain control by appearing as the only force capable of managing India's diverse population. This stance, however, often masked a subtle bias towards Hindu elites who were perceived as more supportive of British rule. The British found it easier to work with Hindu leaders who were more willing to cooperate with the colonial administration. Muslims, on the other hand, were sometimes viewed with suspicion, particularly after the rise of pan-Islamism in the late 19th century. This global movement, which sought to unite Muslims across national boundaries, was seen as a potential threat to British interests. This perceived bias further fueled Muslim anxieties and contributed to a sense of alienation from the British administration. Many Muslims felt that their interests were being sidelined in favor of Hindu elites. The growing divide between Hindus and Muslims was also reflected in the rise of communal organizations on both sides. These organizations often promoted agendas that were at odds with each other, further deepening the divide. Hindu nationalist groups, such as the Hindu Mahasabha, advocated for Hindu dominance in an independent India. They envisioned a nation where Hindu culture and values would be paramount. Muslim organizations like the Muslim League increasingly demanded safeguards for Muslim interests, fearing marginalization in a Hindu-majority state. Leaders like Muhammad Ali Jinnah became vocal advocates for Muslim rights and representation. The stage was thus set for a clash of ideologies that would have profound consequences for the subcontinent's future. The growing polarization between Hindus and Muslims eventually led to the demand for separate nations, culminating in the partition of India in 1947. As the 20th century dawned, India witnessed the parallel rise of two powerful forces, nationalism and communalism. These forces would shape the destiny of the subcontinent in profound and often conflicting ways. Nationalism, in its early stages, transcended religious boundaries, bringing together people from various communities under a common cause. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi envisioned an independent India where Hindus and Muslims would live together in harmony, fostering a spirit of unity and brotherhood. However, as the struggle for independence intensified, so too did the forces of communalism, which sought to divide Indians along religious lines, creating rifts that would have lasting impacts. Communalism, driven by fear and mistrust, began to erode the fabric of Indian society, leading to violent clashes and deep-seated animosities.
The Indian National Congress, founded in 1885, initially served as a platform for educated Indians to voice their demands for greater autonomy within the British Empire. The Congress brought together intellectuals and leaders from various backgrounds, united in their quest for self-governance and reform. However, over time, the Congress's goals evolved to encompass complete independence from British rule, reflecting the growing aspirations of the Indian populace. Mahatma Gandhi's emergence as the preeminent leader of the nationalist movement in the 1920s brought new energy to the fight for freedom, inspiring millions to join the cause. Gandhi's philosophy of non-violent resistance, satyagraha, became a powerful tool in the struggle against colonial oppression. Gandhi's philosophy of non-violent resistance, satyagraha, resonated deeply with millions of Indians, offering a moral and ethical framework for the independence movement. His ability to mobilize large crowds and inspire peaceful demonstrations showcased the strength of collective action and the power of non-violence.
While Gandhi and the Congress sought to unite Indians across religious lines, promoting a vision of a secular and inclusive nation, the Muslim League, under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, became increasingly vocal in its demands for a separate Muslim state, reflecting the growing sense of alienation among Muslims. Jinnah, once an advocate for Hindu-Muslim unity, gradually came to believe that the interests of Muslims would be best served in a separate homeland, free from the dominance of the Hindu majority. Jinnah's transformation from a proponent of unity to a champion of a separate state marked a significant shift in the political landscape of India. His vision of a separate homeland for Muslims, where they could live without fear of persecution, resonated with many who felt marginalized. The fear of being subject to the tyranny of the Hindu majority fueled the demand for a separate state, leading to increased communal tensions and violence.
The growth of communalism was fueled by a complex interplay of factors, including political, economic, and social dynamics. Economic disparities between Hindus and Muslims, exacerbated by colonial policies, created a fertile ground for communal tensions. The British policy of separate electorates, which institutionalized religious divisions, further deepened the divide between the communities. These policies, combined with the rise of communal ideologies, led to a climate of suspicion and fear, making reconciliation increasingly difficult. Furthermore, the rise of Hindu nationalist ideology, which often portrayed India as a Hindu nation, alienated many Muslims who felt their identity and rights were under threat. Hindu nationalist propaganda, emphasizing the primacy of Hindu culture and religion, contributed to the growing sense of exclusion among Muslims. In this climate of suspicion and fear, the idea of a separate Muslim state gained traction, ultimately leading to the partition of India and the creation of Pakistan. The Pakistan movement, spearheaded by Muhammad Ali Jinnah and the Muslim League, represented a pivotal turning point in the history of the Indian subcontinent. It marked the culmination of growing Muslim anxieties, fueled by a complex interplay of political, social, and economic factors. Jinnah, initially a proponent of Hindu-Muslim unity, came to believe that partition was the only viable solution to safeguard the interests of India's Muslim minority.
Jinnah's vision for Pakistan was rooted in the two-nation theory, which posited that Hindus and Muslims constituted two distinct nations with fundamentally different cultures, languages, and values. This theory rejected the notion of a single Indian nation and argued that Muslims, as a separate nation, deserved their own homeland. Jinnah argued that in a united India, Muslims would be relegated to the status of second-class citizens, perpetually at the mercy of a Hindu majority.
The Muslim League's demand for Pakistan gained momentum in the 1940s, particularly after the outbreak of World War II. The Congress's refusal to support the British war effort, coupled with Jinnah's offer of cooperation, further strengthened the League's position. The British, eager to secure Muslim support for the war, made concessions to the League, further emboldening Jinnah's demands for a separate state. In 1940, the Muslim League passed the Lahore Resolution, formally demanding a separate Muslim state. The resolution marked a turning point, making partition a non-negotiable demand for the League. The British government, faced with mounting pressure from both the Congress and the League, found itself increasingly unable to maintain its hold on India. The stage was set for a momentous decision that would redraw the map of the subcontinent forever.